Recording. Good afternoon.
Cool.
It is Tuesday, December. I had a
It's
look.
Tuesday, yeah.
And we're discussing the film Munich with Eric Bana and Daniel Craig and a lot of other good-looking actors. And Rabbi, take it away.
Hey, sorry I was late. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for being here. And unfortunately, some of my notes are actually on my desk at work, but I'll do what I can from memory here.
Do you want me to go get them?
No, they won't help you really, I don't think. But uh, but anyway, we'll soldier through. Little traffic problem on the way getting in today. But so we watched Munich, directed by Steven Spielberg. This is the third movie, I think, by Spielberg that we've watched in our series of real Jewish classics. So we, of course, watched Schindler's List, which was made about 3 years before this movie and won the Oscar for Best Picture, among other things. And then in our last go round, I'm pretty sure we watched The Fabelmans, a much more recent Steven Spielberg movie, much more autobiographical about his own life. Although the screenwriter for The Fabelmans and the screenwriter for Munich are the same guy, Tony Kushner, right? So Tony Kushner, who is best known for his work in the theater and particularly for Angels in America. Of course, is considered to be one of the great theater masterpieces of recent years. So he's worked with Spielberg on a few screenplays, including, as I've mentioned, The Fabelmans, and also worked on the reworked book of West Side Story a couple of years ago. So his work is pretty diverse as well. So Spielberg, of course, comes from a Jewish family, as does Tony Kushner. But that's mostly where the Jewish participation in this movie ends, is with the two of them. The actors are not Jewish, the primary actors, although some of the women in the movie, the actress playing his wife and the actress playing his mother, are both pretty well known Israeli actresses. Of different generations, obviously, and both of them have been honored by the Israeli Film Academy several times over the years. So
this is the wife, Ayala Zur, and Gila Almagor, the mother, has done a lot of films.
Maybe the most famous Israeli actress that I can think of, you know.
Agreed.
So, so this, as with any Steven Spielberg movie, I've talked about him before. He is a master of cinematography, a master of what he does. His actual cinematographer, Janusz Kaminski, worked with him on Schindler's List and on several other movies as well. And, the movie was nominated for 5 Oscars, including the Oscar for Best Picture and Best Screenplay. Was not up for any of the acting Oscars, but there. Oh, one other Jewish person in the movie, Jeffrey Rush, actually is of playing his Israeli handler. And an Oscar winner himself for playing a Jewish character. A movie I'd like to show you, but doesn't seem to be on any streaming service, is the movie Shine, where he plays a Jewish pianist, and has also been nominated. I think he was nominated for his role in a movie called Quills, where I believe he's playing the Marquis de Sade, actually. But so quite an accomplished actor who's also been in movies like Pirates of the Caribbean in that series, right? So a very accomplished actor as well. I think all the actors do fine work in this movie. They're just the parts are not showy in the Academy Awards sort of way. Eric Bana is actually Australian, who plays the main character here, and So he does a credible accent, I think, and it's a complicated accent because he's supposed to be an Israeli who spent time in Europe, right? But I think he does a nice job. Best known probably still to American audiences for playing the Incredible Hulk in the first Marvel movie version of the Hulk after the TV series with Lou Ferrigno was long over. But he's done much more low key and more credible work in other films since then. He's in a very good mystery police procedural type movie set back in his native Australia called Dry from a few years ago. So he does a nice job as Avner here, and I think it's he evokes a lot of sympathy as the movie goes on. Right, I mean, he's really the living embodiment, in a sense, of a kind of post-traumatic stress, as we see through the course of the film. So, but the real stars of this movie are not the actors. I think it's much more of an ensemble piece in that regard. It's an international cast with French actors in it as well. You know, um, and some Israeli Arab actors and some Arabic actors as well. So, um, movie begins really with the credit inspired by real events, and it begins with a staging of the atrocity at the Munich Olympics in 1972. By the way, it's based on a book. So the a third name in the credits. This is what I'm going to forget, but the author of the book itself.
I think it's Rabbi. I think it's George Jones' Vengeance.
Yes, right. And the book was called Vengeance, and so they changed the title to Munich. Now there's probably a couple of reasons for that. One is I think that the title Vengeance sort of tips your hand as to what your movie's about before anybody goes to see it, and I don't think that adequately describes the film's plot really in that title. So I think that's part of the reason. I think there are other movies, sort of B movie potboilers and stuff like that called Vengeance. And that's probably another reason to change the title is not to have it be confused with other things. As I came on, I heard I think Sue saying that there's another movie called Munich. I'm not familiar with that. There's a brand new movie coming out, actually. We'll all have to see that when it comes out, which is about the massacre at the Olympics in Munich. But it's really from the point of view of the American journalists who were there to cover the Olympics, right? We see Jim McKay, really a well-known American sports commentator, who ended up being the guy who was breaking the news about what was going on in Munich, and so apparently there was drama behind the scenes there in terms of who was going to be covering this event. Would it be the anchor people back in New York, or would it be the people who were actually on the ground and right there, even though they were really sports telecasters and not necessarily so well prepared for that. So there's a new movie about that coming out.
Is this 21 Hours at Munich? Is this the one, Susan, that you watched? It's 1 hour 40.
We watched, but Bob and Julie, we watched that.
You
one.
watched that? Okay. So
Yeah.
it's right under Munich, and if you have Prime, it's free.
Yeah. And it appears to be a television movie because it was nominated for Emmy Awards. So
Yes.
I'm not familiar with it, so I can't say whether to recommend it or not. But I just saw the actor, I believe it's Peter Sarsgaard, on one of the talk shows the other night, and he's, I believe, playing Jim McKay in in this new movie that's coming out. I don't think it's been released just yet, but probably before the end of the year. Um, so, but the movie intercuts, these stage scenes. And of course, the first thing we see is what appears to be, I think, some American athletes giving the terrorists a boost over the fence into the Olympic Village, right? Which I think foreshadows the kind of what role does America play in this stuff, which is, I think the movie makes a case that America plays a role that is not necessarily helpful in what's going on around the world, right? So I think that it's an interesting choice at the beginning, I believe based in reality. And then the movie intercuts between actual footage from the way it was being covered by television around the world, and it's a very remarkable piece of editing, really. So editing between newsreel footage, staged footage, and also footage of people in different places receiving the news. First hearing that there's good news and then bad news. And so you see Israelis and Arabs watching the news on television wherever they are. You see Golda Meir seeing the news and hearing what's going on behind the scenes. Right? So it's really, as filmmaking, I'd say that this is a tour de force, right? You really see the skill that someone like Spielberg brings to putting all of these pieces together in very visual ways, and telling the story, um, with image, rather than say a voiceover narration or something like that, right? So it's and then as we get into the main body of the plot, you start to feel some of the um, perhaps intentions of the script and the filmmakers, which is we tend to like our movies with um, you know white hats and black hats. We don't really like nuance and shades of gray. This is a movie much more about what violence does to human beings than it is about the good guys versus the bad guys. I think that's what makes it interesting to me. But when it came out, it was perceived as being an anti-Israel uh, piece of work, and got a lot of negative press for some of which Tony Kushner has yet to live down, I think. But also Spielberg had his reputation dented by this, I think, and it was his making of Schindler's List a few years before that perhaps inoculated him from the worst of that. But remember that this movie came out, I believe, in 2004.
Five.
Five? Well, made in 2004, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe released in five. Um, so it it makes this case that the back and forth violence only makes things worse, right? Only ratchets it up. So more than once you have characters talking about how we've killed the leaders of Black September, but the people who've replaced them are even more violent. One of the characters says at one point that Black September wasn't violent enough for them, um, and it's not an accident, and you probably noticed it, that the last scene in the movie takes place at a park in Brooklyn. And what do you see in the background? The World Trade Centers, right? So by 2004, 2005, of course, they had been destroyed by Arab terrorists. Um, so the idea that what happened in before Munich that led to Munich, what happens in Munich, what happens after Munich, right? That these things are all interrelated, and that there is through these acts of violence, so ratcheting up the violence, which at this point in American history culminates in the destruction of the World Trade Centers in the United States, coming directly into war in Afghanistan, and by this time that the movie comes out, also in Iraq. We'll say that at this at the time that the movie came out, there was not yet, I think, a kind of a widespread American repulsion with what was going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, that we were there for 20 years, right? And the tide had not turned. So in some ways, I think the film is kind of prescient about where that particular adventure is heading, you know, without, of course, ever being able to talk about it directly, but that this uh, idea of vengeance leads to these blurred lines and tends to make things worse rather than better. Um, and so, and yet at the same time, the movie plays out on a very human scale. I mean, we see what this particular mission is doing to Avner as the movie goes on. So early on, someone talks to him about one of these undercover ops who is so afraid of everything that he has to sleep in the closet. And by the end of the movie, that's Avner himself tearing up his own room, looking in the places where he himself has with his team planted bombs, you know, in the back of a television set, in the telephone, inside and under the mattress, and eventually climbing into the closet with his pistol to get some sleep, right? So, in the movie, it works both on a very personal kind of level, and it also is talking about the, you know, on the governmental level, and you know, the distrust of nations. Since, while at the same time, what everybody's fighting for is to have a nation of their own. Well, just about everybody. I mean, certainly the Israelis and the Palestinians are fighting to have a nation of their own. It's the French go-betweens who it's the you know, the one in that sort of, in a strange way, a kind of idyllic scene out in the country, having dinner with his big family, the kids and the grandkids and all of that stuff. And he's saying, you know, we got rid of the guys in Vichy so that we could put the Gaullists in power, you know, so a distaste for states of any kind and not wanting to be associated with any of them, but also willing to sell information to any and everybody, right? So the only thing that matters, it seems, maybe, if you can trust you know, can you trust his word when he says that there's something personal between them and that he has nothing to fear from him, right? You know, you have to decide for yourself whether you can trust anybody or anything in this movie, I think. So the movie goes out of its way several times to sort of um, bring bring the two sides into parallel, right? Bring Israelis and Palestinians into parallel. One of the first spots it does that is when it's talking about the names on the television. They're listing the names of the murdered Israelis, while the Israeli government is putting down pictures on a table of the responsible Palestinian terrorists, right? So that you have this sort of intercutting of Israeli and Palestinian names in the film, and you have other places where you see faces sort of brought together, faces doubled, things like that. And of course, the climactic moment of that is when they're staying at the safe house, and the Palestinians are also staying at the same safe house, right? And Avner has a scene with one of his counterparts in the stairway where they have this conversation about nation and what it means to have a home. And you see it that in some ways both of these men are longing for home, and there's a kind of gray area, if you will, there, right? So, and that's I think, as I said, a lot of folks did not care for this movie when it came out. I'm not sure how it played for all of you now. I'd love to hear, but at the time, we wanted good guys and bad guys, and we didn't want shades of gray, right? And that was certainly true both as advocates for the state of Israel, but also in America in 2005 as we were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. People were not looking for shades of gray at that moment. Yeah. So, to my mind, the movie looks better in retrospect than it did when it came out. But I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say about it.
Janet, you had your hand up before. Did you have a comment?
Yes, I do. Never having been to this group before, this is my first time.
Welcome.
Thank you. And Marilyn said, "You've got to do this." I says, "Okay." What I am curious about, because you started at the top, obviously, in the factual aspect, and you slowly brought it down. Am I correct, Rabbi? And then from there, what I'm curious about is how far down you go, because to me, this film was about evil. And what it is on a macro as well as a micro view.
Yeah.
What is evil? And we certainly saw evil, especially between the Israeli and the Palestinians, as they became friends when they realized all they had in common. And ultimately, obviously, the Israeli killed him. But and then that question really popped into my head at that point. And I didn't know if you were bringing it down that far or not.
I'm not sure what you mean by bringing it down, but
well, philosophically, it's way underneath the aspect of the top, which is factual.
Yeah. So, the book Vengeance claims to be factual. I don't know how much of it anybody can prove, right? But so, yeah, it's true that we start with what you could call actually some documentary footage, right? You have the newscasters and things like that, and then from there it becomes both
right.
It becomes drama, right? So and there's no question that when you try to shape actual events into a dramatic arc, some things are going to be more or less true, right? I mean, I don't know that anybody can really report, dialogue verbatim that, but I believe this scene where they all end up in the same safe house is in the book Vengeance as well. So it's not something that they created out of whole cloth, but also not something that I think you can prove is fact, right? In the same way that you can point to other things, and that's part of what this movie is about, is that facts, right? We watched Denial last week. Facts are real, right, and can't be denied. But the way people feel facts can, in fact, be quite different, right? So, and that is an entirely different thing than denying the facts themselves, right? So, this is part of the Israeli-Palestinian story, is that there are facts from 1948, but two peoples relate to those facts in quite different ways, right? And the movie, I think, even within Avner's own team, there's a line that Daniel Craig's character says pretty late in the movie, where he says, "The only blood I care about is Jewish blood," right? And one of the other members of the team says, not in response to that, but at another point in the film, that holding on to this idea that he's being righteous is the only thing that gets him through, right? So these are two poles of the same feeling, right? So,
Sue has her hand up. Go ahead.
yeah.
What did you say?
Yeah, you.
Oh, okay. Well, Rabbi, you were asking what we thought of this
Yeah.
movie. I had mixed emotions during it. There were parts of it that I found very interesting and that I liked, and there were parts that I found very disturbing and very troubling. And but the one thing, two of the characters that I just most admired, Eric Bana and Daniel Craig, and especially Eric Bana. He did such a wonderful job coming off as a Jew and an Israeli.
Mhm.
It would be hard pressed to believe that he wasn't really Jewish
Yeah.
and or Israeli.
Yeah.
I think he did a fabulous job of acting.
Yeah. I agree with that. Right. And if I think if you watch this movie and you come away sort of morally confused, then the movie's done what it set out to do, right? And so in
I
that
guess
sense,
so.
it's successful, right? I mean, it's not trying to get you to say, oh, this side is right. Oh, that side is right. Right. It's basically to say, look how murky all this stuff is, right? And that the people that we're using to get us our information and to tell us, they're also, right? They're not good people either, right? It's all about who's paying top dollar, and and the CIA comes into it at one point and seems to be protecting this terrorist mastermind of I think we can assume that those three English speakers who prevent them from assassinating that guy, right, and pick a fight on the street, are CIA agents. Can't prove it, right? The movie doesn't claim it per se, but the absurdity of that whole thing can only point to that they were trying to protect that guy from being assassinated. So there was a question about right, and I think there's a line that I must admit, the first time I watched this movie, I didn't really pay any attention to this. I thought it was the just sort of about the fecklessness of European revolutionaries of the time. But there's this woman in the first apartment that he goes to in Europe who's talking about Marcuse and Hegel. And I don't know if you caught that. I say I didn't really catch it the first time around, but she's talking about how Marcuse says that Hegel's philosophy of right does not assign a moral category to wrong. Free will inevitably causes wrong. That's Marx. Right? So I think that's it's actually a more interesting statement about what the movie is really about. And we set out to do the right thing, and often wrongs come from it, right? We see that play out in front of us on a political stage every day, and we're seeing it this week. I mean, see the fall of Assad. There's no doubt that Assad and his father are among the worst, examples of demagogues and dictators of the last 50 years. What will take its place? We'll see. We'll see, So revolutionaries sometimes start out with the idea that they're doing right. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate to right as time goes on. So we'll see. Julie?
I had a question. I seem to remember from 1973 or 72 that the Israeli government wanted to go in and take charge of the rescue operation, but that the Germans did not allow them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You have any recollection of that?
So I believe that's that Israel certainly said that in the aftermath. I don't know whether we know what the inner workings of all that was, right? But there's no question that you know, I remember this is a few years before. Yeah, it's a few years before Entebbe, right? Entebbe's 1976. You know, when the Israelis did, you know, take control of a mission, right? So, would the Israelis have done a better job? Well, they couldn't have done a worse job, right? So, so who knows? But certainly that's what was said after the fact. What I don't know that we have proof. I think this movie's kind of good example of how difficult it is to have something you would call evidence, right? Which is what Eric Bana asks his handler for at the end. You know, can you show me the evidence that the people I killed were the right people? You know, and that's in some ways, you know, when you're dealing with this kind of situation, too much to ask for
Yeah.
is more or less what he's told. Right?
Yeah. Linda, you had your hand up, and then Hubie.
Okay, what I wanted to address was the turning point for me in the movie was when the Israeli and the Palestinian were in the stairwell of the apartment. And I'm trying to remember the exact wording that the Israeli said to the Palestinian about how many years it's going to take you to get to where we are. And the Palestinian said something to the effect, well, how many years did it take you to get to where you are? And it really kind of was the turning point in the movie to me, because both groups are fighting for what they believe in. And I've always felt that there's never going to be peace in the Middle East because of all of this animosity, and that we cannot sit down and talk to one another. And I just am, that's what I wanted to say about the movie. One more thing I wanted to bring up, it's a side note, but there is an author by the name of Daniel Silva that his main character is based very loosely on this event in Munich. His main character is Gabriel Ayan, who's an Israeli, and he was supposed to be the one that went into Munich and cleaned up the mess. So I just thought, I've read all of his books also, and he kind of brings it out of that also. So that's all I had to say.
Yeah. So, yeah, I haven't read the Daniel Silva books. I know about them, but of course they're novels, right?
Right.
But based on a character like this character, for sure. So, but I think you're right that scene is pivotal out, you know, in the stairway of that you know, kind of burnt out safe house in Athens, right? Which is, I think, meant to be symbolic. Here they are, Israelis and Palestinians living together in the same place, which is becoming a burned out hull, you know, of nothingness, right? And having this conversation in way, and there's an element here where you see that these two human beings could get along, right? They're actually talking to each other. You know, one knows who the other is, the other doesn't know, right? You know, but they're having a conversation that could ultimately be productive, perhaps, right? But instead, what they have is this burned out shell, right? Some of the language, I don't have all of the dialogue by any means, but you know, but they're having this conversation about you know, the Palestinian says that, you know, Israel will cease to exist, and says, and Europe and America won't do anything about it because they don't like Palestinians, but they hate the Jews more. You know, and look, these are some of the worries that we have, right? You know,
Hubie,
and
go ahead.
So let me just finish
Oh.
on about that scene, right? You know, that they both have this longing for home, right? You know, he says, really, you really want to go back to, you know, the olive trees that your grandfather had? That's vision. It's yes, that's exactly what he wants. Right? So you know, so I think it's really he says, you don't know what it is not to have a home. Home is everything. Right. And of course, that's exactly what Avner is losing as this movie is going on, this sense of homeland. He's literally lost his home. His wife is now living in Brooklyn, right? You know, he's losing his home for the sake of his home. It's complicated, right? Yeah. Hubie?
Okay, I was come back your comment about what's right. I mean, I thought your remarks were very right apropos. We have the same thing about being right. Go back to the end of World War II. We brought a top Nazi in for a rocket program, and
Yeah.
everyone thought that was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Werner von Braun, right? And those guys, you know, we got to the moon because of those guys. You know, and absolutely, you know, on both sides, East and West, the Russians brought in their own Nazi scientists to help them develop what they wanted to develop, you know? So it's, you know, the immorality of nations, right? And what's right and what isn't right and who gets rehabilitated and, you know, and we see it in this movie too with the CIA protecting the architect of the Black September massacre. But you guys probably all know the name Black September, right? Do you know where that comes from?
No.
So I believe it's September of 1970 when King Hussein in Jordan decides to crack down on the Palestinians in the refugee camps living in Jordan and massacres. I'm not sure how many, but you know, at least hundreds, probably thousands of Palestinians. That time period comes to be called Black September. So the Black September group is actually formed in relation to King Hussein. It's probably why and makes this dialogue pretty authentic when when the Palestinian is talking to Avner in the hallway and he talks about how one day there'll be another war. And again, remember, this is before 1973 in the October War. You know, and it says there'll be another war, and Egypt and Syria and even Jordan, he says, right? So, so the even Jordan part is the Palestinians were not enamored, let's say, because the Jordanians had been oppressing and killing them as well. And of course, it's the Jordanians who've kept them in refugee until 1967. We're keeping them in those refugee camps in the West Bank. I saw somebody's hand, but I didn't see who it was. Someone have a hand up?
Marilyn, and then Nancy.
Well, I wanted to say that I felt that Spielberg had, he wanted to give tribute and give memory to this, this situation, which was so painful. When one Jew is killed, we're all killed. We're all a part of this. And so it was a very long movie. And it goes to show you that war and terror doesn't take, it's not a short part of a real life situation, because it takes a long time, but yet in the end, the moral, and as you had said, Rabbi, and the beliefs and the political values, where do we go with all of this? And look at what happens to a human being. He himself was a totally different psychological and emotionally. He was transformed, and his life will never be the same. So where are we going with all this? And the message to me was, war and terror, and parallel with what's going on today. It was so difficult to live through this because we knew that this was something that really happened and is happening all around us. And we are trying, but so far we don't have a way to change the way the world is. We do the best we can. And it was a good movie, but I think that Spielberg, as he gave life and memory to the Holocaust, also wanted to do the same with this event, not to be forgotten.
Yeah, I think so. But this is very different than Schindler's List, I think. So,
Yes, it's very different.
There's
Very different.
no argument in Schindler's List about who the bad guys are.
Right, that's true, but it does give memory to, and I think his intent, I don't think they were similar, but I think the intent was to bring to the world, and so this isn't forgotten. And and then at the very end, I had to think about the ending when Abner puts out his hand, as we do with hospitality, ask, come and break bread. And then he tries, but they both go their separate ways. As in a play that I once saw about an Arab and an Israeli mother who lived together, cried together, and lived for a while talking about both their sons that they lost, that they sent away to the war for different reasons, one with complete joy and the other with total sadness. And at the end, they both walk away from each other, going back to their own way of beliefs. And so here, when I saw them walk away and turn, each one going back, offering that, he isn't going to go back to Israel for so many reasons. Janet and I discussed all of that at the end of the movie. But I'm glad we watched it, and I'm glad you put it on the list.
Yeah, well, thank you. Let me just try to say something about the difference between this and Schindler's List, right? When Steven Spielberg set out to make the movie Schindler's List, he himself said, was making it very clear that he was very concerned about what we saw in the movie Denial last week, right? He was very concerned that there are Holocaust deniers in the world. And his intent was to make a movie to prove that the Holocaust happened. Now, there is a kind of a, there's something that's sort of like an oxymoron in that, let's make cast a bunch of actors and make a movie, and it will show people that it actually happened. But there's also research from the time. People did research to ask people about the Holocaust before and after they saw the movie, and the movie works on that level, right? It helped reinforce for people that the Holocaust actually happened, a historical event that was no longer current in the minds of people seeing it in some cases, right? So that was the intention of that movie. I don't think the intention of this movie, there's no part of this movie that's about proving whether or not something actually existed or happened, right?
Yeah, I don't think they're proving it. I just think that he doesn't want it to get lost.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I just want to make that distinction.
Yes, I agree with you.
Think about a different movie that we saw related to the Holocaust, a much more complicated and difficult movie was The Pawnbroker, right? Which was made in the early 1960s, when the filmmaker didn't feel any need whatsoever to tell people that this actually happened, because of course everybody knew and believed that this actually happened in the 1960s, right? So he's able to go to a different level, which is much more a movie about survivor's guilt. Very powerful document, I think. Still, to my mind, the greatest movie related to the Holocaust. And this movie is much more similar to The Pawnbroker than it is to Schindler's List, right? It's about the
Hello?
ambiguity of surviving.
Wait, hold, no.
It's about the ambiguity of this struggle, right? And I think that that's extraordinary in a sense. I mean, because yeah, movies just don't do this, right? Movies are much more often about, this one's right and that one's wrong, and the complicated emotional issues of this. And I think the ending scene is really emblematic of it. I mean, how do we know who our friends are? Right? So at the end of the movie, when he offers, come to my house, we'll have dinner, we see what a toll it's taken not only on him, but on his handler, right? That his handler can't accept an invitation from another Jew to come to dinner in a strange town because are they really friends?
Right.
I think that's extraordinary.
Me
Right?
too. I thought so too.
Yeah. I see.
Julie?
Yeah, hand up there.
Just gonna comment, I don't know, and The Pawnbroker was an outstanding movie. I watched it a few times over the years. But I'm wondering if that had the same kind of effect that Schindler's List had as far as Holocaust deniers or making people more aware and accepting the
Yeah.
fact that the Holocaust really happened, as Schindler's List did. Schindler's List was the story of a Gentile who saved Jews, a man who was originally kind of only into himself and womanizing and so forth, but then he had a turnaround and saved Jews. And so here this major Holocaust film was really about a Gentile
Yeah.
who saved Jews.
I would say the big difference there is 40 years, right? So that when the Pawnbroker was made, that wasn't a question anybody would ask, right? Are you more likely to believe that the Holocaust happened because you saw the Pawnbroker? It was not a question. So it was not something that filmmakers had to make movies about to show that it happened, right? 40 years later, we're dealing with the things that we were talking about last week when we watched Denial, right? We're talking about the rise of a group of warped people who are distorting history to say that it never really happened. There may have been those people in the 1960s. They got no airtime, right? Nobody knew they were around. And of course, all this stuff in the age of the internet gets amplified bigger, farther, faster, quicker. Right?
Do you think that that Spielberg would not have had the success in making that point if he had made a Holocaust story that was centered more around the Jewish experience rather than a Christian who saved Jews?
Maybe. I mean,
Just like the boy in striped pajamas was such a hit. It was about a little Christian boy who accidentally ended up in the gas chambers. But what
Yeah.
about all those Jewish children that were put into the gas chambers?
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's a reason he chose to make the movie version of Schindler's Ark rather than something else. I mean, he didn't choose. I don't know. Could you make a movie of Elie Wiesel's Night or something like that? I mean, maybe someone of Spielberg's talent could do that. I mean, wouldn't be an easy movie to
And
adapt.
Spielberg was behind all these Shoah oral histories that have been collected over the country and these holograms that have been created. It was a
Yeah,
big force
a lot of
behind
that comes out of his work on Schindler's List, right? I mean, he wasn't doing that before he made Schindler's List, so it woke
after.
him up to something too, I think, that he decided he needed to do. So I'm just suggesting that, you could, I have actually done this as a program, shown Hollywood's relationship to the Holocaust by generation, right? It changes.
Yeah.
You know? So, so, and in some ways, you know, Schindler's List is the culmination of that, you know, of that change, right? But did he choose it because there was a non-Jewish protagonist? Maybe, you know, I mean, that's one we'd have to ask him. Was it particularly successful because of that? I mean, that's certainly possible. Um, but it's also that we had a filmmaker of the caliber of Spielberg to make that movie. You know, so had he been a Holocaust denier, we'd be in big trouble.
That's right.
You know.
Nancy, you had your hand up before, and then Sandy. Wait a minute. Let me unmute you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was late to the discussion because I was finishing watching the movie.
Okay.
So it's fair. And when I first started watching it, how connected to what's going on in our very immediate time, right away, the collision of countries and people and factions and all of that stuff in the Middle East. But I thought that Spielberg did a superb job of presenting a morally ambiguous subject, which is this right? Is it wrong? I mean, and obviously his character, the people who perpetrated the murders, each of them had their problems. I mean, the bomb maker blows himself up, kills himself, and in that house out in the country, and Abner will never be the same.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure. I think the movie is actually ambiguous about how a couple of those team members die, right?
Yes.
I mean, are they being targeted and murdered, or you know, is this part of Avner's paranoia too, right? I mean, because a bomb maker dealing with this stuff could easily, as someone says to him, bomb makers frequently end up, you know, blowing themselves up, right?
Well,
Not
and he was
not as
the
a
one.
suicide, but as an accident. Yeah.
He was the one in the train station who said to Bana, "I've lost my righteousness. You know, I'm a Jew in so many different ways, but I feel like I've lost my righteousness." So he had basically lost himself.
Right. As does the one who ends up stabbed on a park bench.
Yes, and you don't know why, but it seems somewhat evident he could have done it himself,
He
or
could have.
because somebody did it to him. But you know, anyway.
What we know is that it's not a random robbery because they didn't take anything, right? So that's the only thing that
they cleared out his pockets and his stuff.
Right. But he certainly, you know, the character that Daniel Craig plays is concerned enough about him that he's watching him to wait for him to come home, you know, that he's not himself. You know, so there's reason, you know, and is Avner paranoid that right? There's a scene where he's walking down the street with his little girl, and he sees two men in a black car, and he thinks they're following him, and you know, we see the window unroll and all this time. The guy tosses out a cigarette butt, which, you know, nowadays we would, you know, shouldn't be smoking and you shouldn't be littering, but you know, I mean, it's what people did, right? So you know, so was he paranoid unreasonably, or is you know, you get to this place where you don't know who your friends are, right? You know, so and on a large level that remains true, right? The nation of Israel doesn't know who its friends are. I think that's also true. So Sandy, I think, has been waiting.
Do with your last sentence. Do you know who your friends are?
Yeah.
David and I have a couple that we've gone out with several times. We met them about 6-7 years ago, and we met them through a movie club. So I know that they are big moviegoers, both highly intelligent, both well-educated. She is non-Jewish and from South America, and he is Jewish and non-practicing. We were out with them about 4 weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago. And at the end of the evening, we were sitting around having coffee in a restaurant. And we got to talking about the Holocaust. And I mentioned a story about another friend of mine who was actually a Holocaust victim. And I started telling the story. And this woman said, "Oh, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. I want to know more about your life. I don't want to hear about your friend's life in Germany." And I said, "Well, this is a really interesting story. And there's a moral to it too." And she's, "No, I don't want to hear about the Holocaust." She says, "I don't know much about the Holocaust. That isn't of interest to me now." I mean, the conversation got worse and worse. And when we left them, I said to David, "I will never go out with these people again." He sat there, a non-practicing Jew, didn't say a word. She, who's so well educated and a movie buff, said this, "I don't know much about the Holocaust." These are people younger than us, but not much younger. They're probably around 78 to 80 years old. And this conversation was so painful to me. I said, "That's it." Yeah. I've never cut myself off from friends before like I did that night. About 2 weeks later, she sends me an email, a text saying, "I apologize if I was rude that night, but I wanted to hear more about your life, not the Holocaust." And I just didn't even answer that because it's over. It's over. The Holocaust is so much a part of our lives. We all feel like, you know, even if we didn't suffer, it's a part of our life. In 1942, I was 6 years old, and that's all I heard about. Right. All the adults in the family, that's all they talked about. And we've seen every Holocaust movie and read all the Holocaust books. And to be with people who say, "Well, I don't know much about the Holocaust," educated people, phooey on them.
All right. Well, you know, we've run over time a little bit, I think. Thanks for sticking with it since I was a little late getting here. I appreciate your hanging on. And I think it's interesting, you can talk about the Holocaust a little bit in relation to this movie and how it comes up. I mean, there's a couple of lines where it says, you Germans, the Palestinian says to him when he thinks he's a German, right? "You're too soft on the Jews because of what happened during the Holocaust." The Palestinian says to him, "My grandfather didn't gas anybody," which is true, right? It's an interesting thing. The French, go-between says to him about the different things that are going on, the shooting at the Athens airport, the bombing in a pharmacy in the Netherlands, right? Says Europe hasn't been this interesting since Napoleon marched to Moscow, right? I mean, it completely leaves out World War II and the Nazis and the Shoah. It's a pretty interesting. You could do a whole hour just talking about references to the Holocaust and what that means in the Jewish sensibility and the European sensibility and other and the way different characters in this movie relate to it. It is one of the grievances, in a sense, of Palestinians is that this nation of Israel was created on their backs because of Europeans' feelings about the Holocaust, right? You can agree or disagree with that, but that's how they feel, right? So it's not a dispute about facts; it's a dispute about that's feelings, right?
Mhm.
So it's a very interesting. You could do a whole thing on that. I see there's still a hand, so maybe we're going to run a little late. If anybody needs to go, I understand. But I see Hubie's hand.
Right, and then
also
Nancy.
raised her hand, I think. Yeah.
Okay, you talk about these feelings. The Jews and the Arabs, I'm not saying we had a great life together, but pre-Israel, we're okay. And then along came this Amin Hassini, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, who was a follower of Hitler, and he brought this poison in, and I don't know if we're ever going to get back together again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing say about that, you're right, Hubert. This is not an ancient hatred, right? This is, it's in some sense born out of 19th century nationalism, right? It's the Allied powers who split up the Middle East after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, who were, people talk about Israel are colonialists, right? Well, I mean, this is a part of the world that's been colonized for, at least 500 years, right? I mean, the absentee landlords in Turkey were colonists. If modern Israel is colonists, then those were colonists too, right? So I sort of reject the term, but the promises that were made to Jews living there, and the promises that were also made to Arabs living there, were contradictory promises from the British and the French, and those problems are still a part of this now, right? So it's not an ancient hatred. So in that sense, maybe there's some room to get back together. But you're also right that it was not until the Nazis in North Africa and that books like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion got translated into Arabic. So it's a reasonable argument could be made that anti-Semitism didn't exist in the Arab Middle East until the 20th century, right? So, not that things were perfect, as you said, but if you can go all the way back to Maimonides, who talked about how great it was for a Jewish businessman to have a Muslim partner because, he could open the shop on Saturday and you could open the shop on Friday, right? And so that was desirable, right? And certainly when I don't have to tell you guys that, when we talk about the golden age of Spain and the Jewish writing and philosophy and poetry and all that stuff from that time period, it's all Muslim Spain that we're talking about, not Christian Spain. So this is not an ancient hatred. So in that sense, things that aren't ancient, maybe you can do something about. It's not going to be easy and it's not going to be quick. And, I don't know if any of us will see it, but I think the fact that it's not ancient is actually on our side.
There's one more point on this, and that is that in wars there's winners and there's losers, and this Hassini, he went with the losers, and Israel won. We won,
right?
But I don't know that it makes for peace.
No, not necessarily, right? And I mean, even nowadays, it's rare that you get actual peace agreements between warring parties. You get ceasefires. You get other kinds of things, but you rarely get, a peace treaty out of it, right? And so time will tell. See two more hands, and then maybe we'll have to call it quits, right? So who was next?
Janet and then Nancy.
Wanted to thank Sandy. I thought what she did was very brave and very wonderful. And I've never met you because I'm new in this class, but it's very easy to discuss things intellectually because there's no feeling. And you brought out feeling. And I think that takes courage. And I was very impressed.
Yeah.
I'm Nancy.
I'm glad you guys have met each other.
Yes.
You're talking about who your friends are. I mean, we're friends here. So
meet you someday, Janet. Thank you.
Pass on what I was going to say because we've said a lot and it's getting late. But
yeah,
I thought that as a film, I think it's one of the better films that we've seen. I mean, I'd say The Pawnbroker and a few others are brilliant, but this one at least made. I mean, cinematography Graphically, it was fabulous, and it made it all very believable,
Mhm.
even though it was horrible. Anyway, my final shot, and then I'm going to be quiet. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah,
Nice to
okay.
see you too,
Yeah,
Nancy.
it's nice to see everybody. The cinematographer, Janusz Kaminski, one of the great
Yes,
cinematographers in the
yes.
history of film.
And
So, you know, he did Schindler's List, he did this, he's done other things with Spielberg, he's done stuff with other directors too, and he's consistently remarkable. And I think the look of this film, it's sort of dictated in a way by um, the actual footage that they use at the beginning. Is he wants it all to look kind of documentary-ish, you know,
Mhm.
with a few exceptions, you know, and it's really a fascinating work. And so I've said there is nobody, I don't know that there's anybody alive working like Spielberg who thinks visually the way he does. So it's really, it shows in the movie. So
That's
um,
very true.
I said about Spielberg a while back that most directors would kill to have his unsuccessful movies on their biography, you know?
I
So
also think he collaborates with John Williams, and the music was beautiful as well.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot we can do a lot with the music too. I mean, and clearly, my favorite is in the scene where, of course, the Palestinian terrorist puts on Arabic music, and then
Yeah. And then he
Daniel Craig gets
switches
up
it.
and puts on French music, and the guy goes back and puts on the Arabic music. What they can agree on is Al Green,
Yeah.
and it's called "Let's Stay Together."
Hmm.
Uh, Right, that was
So
great.
the
Yeah.
fascinating, a little bit of humor, but also a symbolic choice of a song, right? You know.
Mhm.
Let's be in this burned out hovel together.
Together, right.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody. It's
Thank
great to
you.
see everyone. And this Sunday, regular Friday night services, Sunday, 12:30 start time with Lox Bagels, with Rabbi Dr. Susan Marks. Susan, did you have your hand up? Susan Wellett?
No, you just said something about a regular Friday night service. I thought it was,
Well, Tikkun Olam. No, wait a minute. Wait, what is it?
no,
It-
it's the Shabbat.
choral service.
Oh, okay, choir Shabbat.
I registered for something. I know
Right.
that.
It's definite. All right, it's choir show. Oh, there's a Shabbat and schmooze at
Right.
5:45. That's what's different.
Mhm.
Right.
So there'll be the regular oneg after the service, but there'll be a little bit of oneg before the service
Like a
too.
little cheese and crackers.
Oh, okay.
Crackers, some wine and
Right.
juice, whatever. You know.
Okay.
All right.
So,
All right. Good to see
see you-
everybody.
see you there.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi.